Hi, my name is Antonio Coello. I welcome you to the Dreamspeakers digital series. This is a workshop that I have entitled Hollywood Cinema and the Ideology of Discrimination. Let me first say that I'm a Mexican, that I have Indigenous, African, and European heritage, that it is not my fault, but because of this, I have encountered racism and discrimination throughout all my life. I have been called an Indian, I have been called a nigger, I have been called a slave, I have been called a Mexican, with the obvious intention to be insulted by white people. So, from my experience in dealing with racism, I came to the understanding that societies that faced colonization in the past are essentially racist. And sometimes we don't even acknowledge it. We don't even know it because we aren't even aware of it. So in my case, I realized at some point that the ideal of beauty that I had in mind was that of a blonde person. And I had the idea that my skin color was not beautiful. And how did that happen? I assume it must have been the media and the television, the films that I had been exposed to during my early childhood. So, in some way, my childhood was some sort of a residential school process where many concepts were introduced to my mind, and I took them. I assimilated them. I I was a racist against myself. I was discriminating my own self. So the intention of this workshop is to analyze briefly four characters that I consider representative of the ideology of discrimination that are very well known because of their Hollywood movies. So before starting with these characters, I would like to just briefly go back in history to 1930 when the Motion Picture Production Code was adopted. This code was meant to govern American film production, and it actually did for more than 30 years, overlapping with Hollywood's golden age. So this code, it's kind of long. I cannot read it all because of the time frame we have here, but I'm going to read a few sentences. It says, the task undertaken by the motion picture producers and distributors of America, cooperating with educators, dramatists, church authorities, and leaders in the field of child education and social welfare work, has now resulted in the adoption of a new code by the Association of Motion Picture Producers. Principles underlying the code. Motion picture producers recognize the high trust and confidence which have been placed in them by the people of the world, and they recognize their responsibility to the public because of this trust. Number two, theatrical motion pictures are primarily to be regarded as entertainment. Mankind has always regarded the importance of entertainment and its value in rebuilding the bodies and souls of human beings. Particular applications. I'm going to go to the sex related section where number 5 says, white slavery shall not be treated. Number 6 says, miscegenation is forbidden. Miscegenation is a very racist term to refer to interracial relationships. So this code was a very racist guide that ruled American film production until the Supreme Court decided that they were not to censor any of the films, and later the actual rating system was adopted. So now I want to jump on the first character that I intend to analyze, and that is Tarzan. So Tarzan first appeared on a magazine in 1912. There, he introduces himself to Jane as Tarzan, the killer of beasts and many black men. 2 years later, in 1914, the novel came out. It was with the title Tarzan of the Apes. And 4 years later, in 1918, the first film of Tarzan was made. This was a silent film. It had also the same title as the novel. Let me just say that up until now, there are like 89 films of Tarzan, according to IMDb. So, on the original novel, Tarzan was raised by a fictional species of apes that they called in the novel Mangani. But there happens to be a real tribe from Africa called Magani. So the premise of Tarzan is that white men are destined to rule no matter what the conditions are. And they are destined to rule not only over people, over nature. And on this first film, the silent film from 1918, Tarzan is seen killing a black African man, and he enjoys it. He celebrates the killing. And then Tarzan is seen killing a lion and a gorilla, and he also enjoys it. And the most horrific thing about this film is that Tarzan sets an African village on fire so that white people can exterminate the villagers. So Tarzan is a very colonialist depiction of Africa. There has to be a white superior being in order for American audience to identify with a foreign environment. So Tarzan represents the supremacist white male figure. He rules over the natives, over the animals, over the trees, over everything. He is the king of the jungle. There was another Tarzan film that came out in 2016. It's the latest. It tries to be revisionist. It does acknowledge the genocide that was committed in Congo by King Leopold from Belgium. But again, it presents Tarzan as a superhero that is revered by the natives, by the local African people. So the relationship between Tarzan and the African people is not horizontal. He is a figure of authority. He is a figure of superiority. And the Africans acknowledge that, and they sing and revere Tarzan. So Tarzan is essentially the metaphor of white supremacism in its archetypical version. Now I'm going to jump into the next character. That was Stepin Fetchit. That's the name of the character. It first appeared in 1934, and it was played by the first African-American actor, whose name was Lincoln Perry. Throughout his career, Lincoln Perry tried to achieve equal payment from Fox Studios, and he never obtained it. And the character is just the most horrific stereotype that white people could conceive. So this Stepin Fetchit was promoted as laziest man in the world. He can hardly speak. He doesn't seem to be intelligent enough to articulate elaborate phrases. And he refuses to work by adopting a peculiar corporal attitude whenever any task or job is to be done. So you can see here Stepin Fetchit in his typical corporal attitude before any type of work. This is very insulting because African people were enslaved and they worked harder than anyone in the United States of America. And the depiction, the hegemonic narrative, the white narrative, is that Africans are lazy. So they rewrite history, they change it to fit their own narrative and to ridiculize the other, in this case, an African American. I'm gonna jump now into the next character, who is the Phantom. So the Phantom is the first hero to wear the skin tight that later became a hallmark of all superheroes. And the Phantom first appeared as a comic strip. It still goes on as a comic strip. But in 1943, there was a 15-episode serial called The Phantom that was released by Columbia Pictures. And in the original comic strip, the Phantom lived in a fictional country called Bangala, which was supposed to be in Africa. But on the film series, Bangala is a place in India. So the plot of the Phantom consists basically of a lineage of white male heroes, a lineage that has been going on from generation to generation, from father to son. It's a patriarchal lineage of people who have been in charge of keeping a treasure that belongs to the indigenous people. And in order to keep the treasure of the indigenous people, they deceive the indigenous people. So they, by tricking them with a smoke curtain, they make the indigenous people think that the Phantom is some kind of godlike figure with supernatural powers, so that he can appear and disappear at will. On the original comic strip, the Phantom did not have superpowers, but on the film, he does. There is a very emblematic moment when the Phantom snatches a stick from the hand of an indigenous person, and he tells him, if you are lying, this stick will become a serpent. And he throws it away, and the stick does become a serpent. This is the first time on film history that the metaphor of supremacism is represented. So we have a male character, a hero, superhero, performing or showing supernatural powers. So it's a demonstration of superiority over indigenous people. So the Phantom has this task to guard the treasure of the indigenous people. And there's a character, there's a lady who at some point asks the Phantom, is the treasure yours, or is it the indigenous people? And the Phantom gives an ambiguous response, but later, by the end of the series, the Phantom takes her ring from the treasure, gives it to the lady, and he says, take this as a reminder of the treasure of the Phantom, therefore claiming himself ownership over the treasure that is supposed to belong to the indigenous people. So what he did was not ethical. He was supposed to be the keeper, not to give away to white ladies the treasure of someone else's. So during World War II, the comic of the Phantom was very popular among the troops that were stationed in Papua New Guinea. And strangely, it became very popular among the natives, perhaps because the Phantom lived in a jungle, perhaps because he was allegedly defending the indigenous people. But the thing is that the Wagi people from the central highlands of Papua New Guinea, they started creating ritual shields with the image of the Phantom. So they were expropriating the character from mainstream culture and resignifying it into their own cultural dynamics. And this is a process that is inherent to culture. Mutual expropriation will constantly happen in culture as we can see. So now I'm gonna jump into the last character that I intend to briefly analyze, and that is the Lone Ranger. So the Lone Ranger had started as a radio show in 1933, then as a TV series in 1949, and finally the first movie was released in 1956. So basically the plot is that 8 US Marshals were ambushed, and one of them was able to survive because of the assistance of an indigenous person. And this indigenous person is the character of Tonto. I just would like to say that Tonto in Spanish means dumb. So to name a character Tonto is very much an insult, and it's really racist. I would like to say as well that the character of Tonto was originally played in the TV series and the first film by an indigenous actor. That he was Jay Silverheels, a Mohawk guy, but he just played the stereotype. His dialogues were constantly in broken English. He never ever articulated any complex phrase. He was just the companion of the Lone Ranger in a very subordinate position. And here I want to note the term kimosabi. I thought it was a fictional term, but it turns out that it does come from an Ojibwe and Potawatomi term, which is gimuzavi. I don't know if I did pronounce it properly, sorry if I didn't, which is translated as he or she looks out in secret. So it was translated as trusty scout, but then as faithful friend. So this term, kimosabi, seems to reinforce the asymmetrical friendship of the Lone Ranger and Tonto. So Tonto is more like an assistant. The authority figure is the Lone Ranger. And kimosabi is turned into a term that almost reveres and reinforces the idea of superiority over the indigenous people. So the Lone Ranger is supposed to be the friend of the indigenous people. He's supposed to be a person trying to work for justice. But this is also a very paternalistic scheme of discrimination, because the Lone Ranger has to be the guy who represents the Indians before the whites. They cannot represent themselves. And the Lone Ranger has to be the guy who tells the Indians how to act, what to do on a given situation, because obviously they can't as well. So he becomes like a leader or a figure of leadership among the Indians, and this is also very disrespectful. But the most horrific thing about the Lone Ranger is that it is based on a historical character that was the first African American US Marshal. And he had indeed an indigenous companion, and they would go bounty hunting. From the bounties they would get, they would give away silver coins to the people to obtain information. So that's how the idea of the silver bullet came out. But then the Lone Ranger is whitened. It's turned into a white guy that has a white horse and a white hat. So he's whitened to the utmost extreme. Then there is another version of the Lone Ranger from 2013. The film has an amazing cinematography, truly. It tries to be revisionist and politically correct, and they make, in their attempt to be revisionist and politically correct, they make Tonto the main character of the film. And Tonto does not have like a broken speech. He can articulate phrases, he can think, he can make deductions. He's a smart Indian. But the character is played by Johnny Depp, who's a white actor, really well known. And that is misrepresentation. And so we are again against a stereotype. But it's not like the traditional stereotype of the dumb Indian, the tonto Indian that can hardly speak and that will subdue to the authority of the Lone Ranger and become almost like a slave to the Lone Ranger. In this new version, tonto shows some new stereotypes, new age stereotypes. So he's depicted as spiritually enhanced. He can talk to the horse, he can talk to the elements of nature. And that is very much a stereotype of New Age white philosophy. So it's like a concession. We are not depicting you anymore like a dumb, like a tonto. Now you'll have at least some spiritual enhancement. Now I'm gonna analyze a few aspects of Hollywood cinema that I consider to be in line with this ideology of discrimination. So, for instance, I believe the ideology of discrimination is not about skin color. It goes way beyond. It's about segregation. It's about exclusion. It's about intolerance. It's about ridiculization. It's about disrespect. It is about abuse. So the ideology of discrimination is kind of obsessed with colors, not only skin colors, but all colors in general. So, for instance, pink on Hollywood films is almost on every situation a woman's color, exclusive to women. Just like blue becomes the color for male. So who determined this? For instance, I lived in India, and when I first arrived there, one of the first things that shocked me was to see men with pink turbans. And pink in Indian society was a color as beautiful as any other color and was not exclusive to women. So in this moral order that the ideology of discrimination tries to disseminate, they want us to be a binary society. They want us to think the way they think. They want us to consume what they consume. They want us to behave the way they behave. They want us to be immersed in their dynamics. So the ideology of discrimination in its obsession with colors goes further beyond. So, for instance, if we think of Traffic, there was this movie Traffic where anytime they would cross the border and go into Mexico, the cinematographer was using a yellow filter. So poverty was depicted with a yellow filter. Third world realities are depicted with a yellow filter. And it became like a convention in Hollywood. So nowadays, many films use the yellow filter to depict poverty. And this yellow filter would not allow the audience to identify or to have an emotional connection with any of the characters of this third world reality, because we are seeing it from afar. The yellow filter creates an artificial distance and turns the third world reality into some kind of decadent spectacle for the entertainment of American society. So the colors are one of the obsessions of the ideology of discrimination. But there's also another aspect that I want to briefly comment, which are explosions. So the ideology of discrimination is also about disrespect to nature. They sensationalize destruction and explosions to the extent that it became an essential part of entertainment. There cannot be nowadays an action movie without explosions. It is a violent ideology. And not only the system is violent, there's structural violence in capitalism against peoples of color who make less of an income than white people, but also the peoples of color are presented as the perpetrators of violence. So if you think, like, ever since like Indians attacking the white settlers, to African American gangsters like assaulting or behaving as criminals, or Mexicans. So in Hollywood's narrative, it is the people of color who perpetrate the violence, while in real history it was the other way around. It was the European empires, England, Spain, France, Portugal, that started colonization, that went all over the world and did the most horrendous things to people. They killed millions of people. And now in their entertainment narrative, they are the victims. So basically, the ideology of discrimination is also about imposing a narrative. And to do so, they rewrite history. If we think of Pocahontas, for instance, she may have been 13 to 14 years old when she married this guy. So it was not about romantic love. It was about abduction and rape. But Disney sensationalized this story and made the indigenous character of Pocahontas seem to be in love not with the character, not with the white character, but with what he represents, which is civilization. So I believe by being exposed to mainstream media, we live under a low-intensity symbolic war. We are being bombarded by mainstream culture, and mainstream culture sells us through media an artificial supremacy that is slowly incepted into our minds with superheroes, with superpowers, or with characters like Tarzan, the Phantom, the Lone Ranger. So the ideology of discrimination is about presenting white people as superior, depicting white people as superior and peoples of color as inferior. This is the main purpose of the narrative. But probably their ultimate goal is to homogenize cultural diversity. They want a world where everyone thinks the way they think. They want a world where everyone consumes what they consume. They want a world where everybody behaves and acts just the way they do. And if we all do this, if we all become as disrespectful to nature as Hollywood films are, we'll finish the world. And if we all become as disrespectful to other peoples, we'll kill each other and finish humanity. So this is causing harm. So my invitation is to introspection and to find out what are the elements of the ideology of discrimination that we have incorporated. So please think of your ideal of beauty. Has it been shaped by media? Does it correspond to the mediatic ideal of beauty? Think, for instance, of your understanding of the world. Has it been in some way shaped by media? Think of your role and attitude before the environment. Has it been influenced by media? So I hope this brief talk was of some use. Thank you very much, and please stay safe and take good care.